In this lesson, we'll give users the ability to reset their passwords if they forget them. The implementation closely parallels the account activations from lesson 11, giving us yet another example of creating a Rails resource from scratch, as well as a second example of sending email in production.
As nice as it is to have account activation working, I think password reset is even more important. Of course, the two are complementary. If you forget your password and you need a password reset link sent to you, that requires having a valid email address, which we've now taken care of through account activation. Moreover, the implementations are actually quite similar, so there's a lot of parallel structure we'll be able to make use of. Let's take another look at that table from the beginning of the lesson. So we've got find by email, string is password, the digest is password digest. Then we had in lesson 8 the find by ID, remember token, remember digest. We've just implemented this where we find by email and then compare a hash version of the activation token to the activation digest. And finally, we'll find by email again, just as we had before with the activation token and the password. And then instead of an activation token, there will be a reset token, and that will be compared to a reset digest in the database. And of course, we'll be able to reuse this authenticated question mark method that we've now generalized to handle different kinds of tokens. As similar as the back end is, though, the front end is quite different. With account activation, we didn't actually change anything in any views. But with password reset, we're actually going to modify one view and add two others. So let's take a look at some mock-ups of that. The first thing we'll do is add a forgot password link here to the login form, so that if users forget their passwords, they can click on this and then get a form like this. Here the user will enter an email address, and if that email address is valid, that is to say if it corresponds to an actual user in the database, then they'll get an email with a reset link. And that reset link will then go to this sort of form, a reset password form, where they can enter a new password and its confirmation. As with sessions and account activations, we'll be modeling password resets as a RESTful resource, even though it won't be associated with an active record model. Instead, as with account activations, all relevant data will be associated with the user model. Let's make a topic branch for password reset. Recall that account activation and password reset used to be the same lesson, but now we've got two lessons, and so we've got a different branch. So this is the right branch, password reset. As with account activations, we'll define a new resource, in this case a password resets resource. So we should generate that as usual. We need a controller corresponding to the resource, and then password reset. And now, unlike account activation, where I erroneously put in the edit action here on the command line and the no test framework flag, we actually do need it here for password resets. In fact, if we look at the mockups again, this here is going to be a form for a new password reset, and this will be a form to edit a password reset. So thinking in terms of the REST architecture, we can figure out what these forms will be on the back end. So we're going to need a new action and template. This is why we have this on the command line. Of course, we could define this by hand, but it's nicer to do it here. So we need new and edit. And since we'll plan to use an integration test to test this, rather than actually testing the individual templates, I'm going to give it this no test framework flag. Since we're going to be creating and editing password resets, we need some routes for those. It's going to be resources password resets. In this case, it's going to be new create, edit, and update. we want all of those routes. And now we're already in a position to add that forgot password link. This thing here. Think about what this is. This is creating a new, well, this form here is creating a new password reset. So this should be the new page. This should be new.html.erb in the password resets directory. So that's an app, views, password resets. There it is, new. So that's what's going to be behind this link, which means this is the new password resets link. You can get that with the named route, new password reset path. Let's go to our login form. That's in new session. So we want to go here, where is it, password, and just add a link here. In fact, let's just look at our actual application. This is the current state of the login page, and we want to have a link right here. So let's put that between the label and the box. That's here. And this is going to be the new password reset path, following the REST conventions. There we go, forgot password link. Of course, if we click on it, we'll just get that template that came with the generation. There we go. So it's just the temporary template. We'll fill this in a moment, but let's first get the data model set up. I can show you that. This is what it's going to look like. Remember, we just added these activation attributes here, the digest corresponding to the activation token, the activated boolean and activated at datetime timestamp. So now we're going to add reset digest corresponding to a reset token that will get sent in an email. And then, because this is a potentially very dangerous operation that someone could get access to an account by resetting the password, we're going to expire the password reset after 2 hours. In order to do that, we need to record when the password reset was sent. So we'll do that with this timestamp. We'll generate the migration as usual. We want to reset digest. And this is a date time. Look at the migration. In fact, we're not going to change anything. So here we're adding the reset digest, which is a string, and reset sent out a date time to the users table, and these defaults are fine. So let's just run the migration. Okay, now we're ready to make that form. It's right here. So we click that link, and then we want to render this form. So we actually have it here. We want to change this into this. It's going to be similar in many ways to this form, so let's just take a look at the analog. So let's say this is forgot password. And we can give it a title as well. And the form will be quite similar. In fact, let's just copy it. Something wrong with the syntax highlighting, which suggests that I forgot something. Here we go. There we go. That's nice. And let's take a look at what we're going to do here. As with sessions, password resets will not be backed by any sort of active record object, so the form for is very similar, except instead of routing to the login path, we're going to route to the password resets path. By the way, if you have trouble remembering exactly which one of these named routes to use, there's a table here. What we're doing here is creating a new password reset, and that goes to password resets path. So it'll be routed to the create action. The URL will be /password resets. This is the analog of the create action for users, which is at users path. Let's go back here. We've got, instead of a form for a session, it'll be a form for a password reset. And let's see, the email is the same. We're going to have an email field, remember. This. We don't need a password, so let's just get rid of that. And we certainly don't need a remember me checkbox. And we don't need this. But we do need the submit button. Let's have it read, well, what do we have on the mockup? Just submit. In fact, I think that's the default. Can I do this? Now it looks like it needs an argument, so let's just put submit. Oops, I forgot to remove this, the part that was generated. So let's get rid of that. See what that looks like. All right. When we submit this, it will be routed to the create action. You click on it, it won't work, of course. So let's take a look at our password resets. Oh, where's the controller? Let's refresh it. Here it is. This will be very similar to the account activation controller, so let's take a look at that. Of course, we don't have a new action over there, but we do have an edit action. The first line is almost exactly the same. In fact, let's copy it. It's not identical though. Remember the way that we get the email before. Let's see, let's go to the sessions controller. So the sessions form, the new sessions form, gives you a params of session of email. So this here will give us params of password reset of email. So we need that. So params of password reset of email. And there's one slight difference. Over here, this email address was inserted into the email template that we sent to the person needing an account activation. In particular, it's all lowercase because it came right out of the database. But here, this is being submitted by the user, so we should downcase it, just in case. Finally, later on, we're going to want to pull this user out in the test. We're going to write an integration test, so we should make it an @user, so we can use that assigns of user trick. And now we're ready to write the branches. What are the two possibilities? Oops, look at that. Too many spaces there. All right, so we're going to say if @user. This is if the user is valid, else when it's invalid. Or I should say when the email is valid. So this is if the email actually exists, so the user has been successfully pulled out of the database, then we want to create the new digest. So let's do this. Let's create a reset digest. This doesn't exist, we're going to have to write this on the user model. Basically what we're doing here is we're anticipating this refactoring. Where was it? Yeah, so here we did user.activate. We put the activation on the user model as a refactoring. Now we're just going to anticipate that. And we're also going to anticipate the sending of email. Where was that? That was send activation. Oh, that's in the users controller. Right, that's when users sign up. We're also going to anticipate this little abstraction layer. So we'll write @user dot send password reset email. And then let's do a flash message as we did before here. I feel like this is an info. It's not a warning. It's success, I suppose, but I think this is the color I prefer in this context. And let's redirect to the root URL. And if the email isn't found, then we should render a flash. And here we're going to re-render the new page if the email isn't found, this new password reset page. So this should be flash.now instead of just regular flash. And we need a key. And then render new. This is similar to what happens here in the sessions controller, just doing this. You can see little bits and pieces of our application are all coming together in this one spot. So let's save that and take a look. And here we're getting the same error because, in fact, we're doing this in the wrong place. We're doing it in the edit action, which should be the create action. Let's do that. That was silly. Okay, here we go. Now this should be routed properly, and all right, email address not found. I'm actually not sure why that happened. Oh no, it's because I submitted it with the blank email. There we go. Can submit again. Now it's working. And if I put in an email address that does exist, then it'll get to this branch and complain that it doesn't have this method. So let's put that in. All right, let's put this right after this here. So create reset digest. And this parallels the callback we had for the create activation digest. So we'll do self dot reset token. Of course, we'll have to add that as a virtual attribute. Again, we'll reuse this new token method that we wrote before. And then the second part parallels this a little bit. We're going to update a couple of attributes. We'll update the reset digest with the hash version of this reset token, and we'll also update reset sent at. So this will save the reset digest to the database, and it should be user.digest of the reset token. And then reset sent at right now. So if we look at it now, the next method will fail. So reset token equals, oh actually no, that's not what failed. In fact, we can go here, let's look at our tests. Oh, we don't actually use it in the user model test, so let's go up here and add reset token. And then over here, we'll run into this problem, so the send password reset email won't work because it doesn't exist yet. All right, so let's add that. It'll just be the equivalent of this. In fact, let's just copy this. And then it's going to be usermailer.password reset. Again, it takes an argument, which is self. We're going to have to write this. It doesn't exist yet. Well, we'll have to fill it in. It does exist, but it doesn't do the right thing yet. So that's this here. But this email delivery method is now properly defined. Go back here. Let's go over here and save this, and the controller and form are now working, and the back end here is also defined. So all we need to do is define this mailer. As you might expect, this broadly parallels the implementation of the account activation mailer. So let's give this an argument there. In fact, we can even just copy this. It's almost exactly the same. Just a change in the subject. So the subject is password reset. And then we need to fill in the templates. So here, remember where those are. Views user mailer. So before we did these two templates, let's now define these. Let's define the text one first. So I can do this. Give them the link. Remember, this is the edit password reset URL, so edit password reset path. We're using the corresponding URL version, which is the fully qualified URL. And as with account activation, instead of an integer ID, we'll be using the token. So that's going to be this. And the email is email. User.email. Again, this is very similar. We can look back here. This is very similar to this. And we're going to plan to expire this link. So let's say this link will expire in 2 hours. All right, save that, and then just copy this. It's very similar here. So the password reset h1, and then just paste this in. These should be paragraph tags. This will be a link to. Save this over here. Looks like it's unsaved. Now, as with account activation, we can take a look at some email previews. Let's go to those here. Test, mailers, previews, and can open this up. As with account activation, we need a user here. We'll just pick out the first one again. And now it needs a token. It needs a reset token. Again, we're just displaying it here, so it doesn't actually have to correspond to a digest or anything. It's just a preview. Do that, and let's take a look at it. All right, looks pretty good. You can look at this here. Look at the plain text version. And here's the reset link. It goes to password resets / here's the token and then the email address. And we've got some tests for the mailer, so let's add that here. It's here in user mailer test. The test will be almost exactly the same, so we can just copy this here and change the things that need to be changed. So this is test password reset. And then instead of activation token, do reset token. The mail will be password reset. Subject should be password reset. And then this should be reset token. But everything else is the same, right? Oh no, the name shouldn't appear. We could have included it, but we decided not to. In fact, that's instructive. You can see how you might have caught that. So there's a failure there, and you think, oh, well, I guess we could add it or not. But for a password reset, I feel like there's no need to personalize it. For account activation, I want it to be friendly, but this doesn't have to be friendly necessarily. All right, that's a good basic test of this preview we just saw. Let's rerun the whole test suite, make sure we're green. All right, now let's submit it and see what happens. Oh, I put 2 slashes in there. That's kind of weird. I guess it works anyway. There it is. So let's just go to slash, that's fine. And, oh man, I forgot my password. All right, we've got the info here, which gives us that blue box. And that should have sent the email, at least in the log. Let's take a look. Here it is, right here. Of course, following this sort of link doesn't work right now. Copy it, put it in, see what happens. Just goes to that edit template we have. Right here, it got routed to here, which rendered the template. So now we need a form to reset the password. It'd be very similar to the form used to update users. Let's look at that here. So the user's edit form. Just copy the stuff at the top here. In fact, even the error messages will work. Because remember, we're not actually editing a password reset here, we're editing a user. It's the password reset attributes on the user model that we're going to be changing here. So this will work. Let's call it reset password. Copy these here, the divs, closing divs. And it's very similar. We've got just the password though and its confirmation. So let's do this. You can see we're reusing a lot of the same ideas. We need an end here. And we do want a submit button of some kind. So let's put that in. say update password. And save this. This might actually work. Oh no, there's something wrong. Well, it might render. Let's take a look. Nope. Oh, what's going on here is it's trying to render a form for @user, but there is no @user. So let's do that here. In fact, we're going to both edit and update this password reset. And both of them will need a user. So this is similar to what we did here in the users controller. Remember, we ended up putting the @user here in correct user, and then we just use that instance variable in edit and update. So the correct user gets called on edit and update, so we didn't need to separately define @user for these guys. So we're going to do that here. We're going to put in a before filter, call it just get user. This is optional, but this is a nice little way to eliminate some duplication. This is only edit and update. This is also quite common in Rails code. There's a shared instance variable like this. So I'm going to find by the email. This is just like in the account activation controller, account activations controller. It's here. Where is that? Let's close these down. Actually, there's too many of these. There we go. So this is just like here. We're finding by the email that's in the params. It's just params of email because of the URL structure. Right here. Oh no, I'm sorry, it's not that. It's this. This gives us the key value pair email and then the actual email. So we find by email and then get an @user. Let's take a look at this. Still giving me nil problem. Why is that? Oh, it's not saved, that's why. All right, now it's rendering the form. Let's look at it though. So here you can see the action because we did this form for @user. Right, so here in the edit form, there's a form for @user. This is the edit for the password reset. So this form for @user though is generating a route assuming that we want to edit a user. So that's why we've got this here, action equals /users / the ID. But what we really want is the URL for editing password resets. And that's like this. Password, we can look at the table here. That's password reset path of the reset. That's this. This will send a patch request automatically because the @user exists in the database. So Rails knows to construct a form for editing something, for updating something. But we have to tell it what the path is in this case. In this case, the ID is just the token. In fact, I should probably update that table. Yeah, so let's say this is the token. This is the ID. In the case of users, we used the whole object, and Rails knew to convert the object to the ID like 1. But in this case, we're actually passing it the ID, which is in this case the token. So let's go back here and save this and take a look at the form. Oops. Line 17 syntax error. Oh, I forgot a parenthesis probably. Yeah, there we go. Okay, now we can take a look at it. And now the action is /password reset / the token. Let's submit this thing and see what happens. Well, actually, we can look at the params here. This is really useful. So here's params of email is the email address, and params of ID is the token. So those are the things that are displayed here in the debug information. Let's update this password. Okay, this just got routed to the update action here. Now Rails is trying to render a template, but there is no such template. Let's think about what can go wrong here. Well, let's handle the case of success. Let's say if user, well, how do we handle updating something in the case of users? Remember, that's at user.update attributes of user params. So we're going to want the same thing here. This should be at user.update attributes. And we want strong parameters, as over here. Except in this case, instead of name and email, in addition to password and confirmation, we just want the latter two. So we can do this. So if at user.update attributes, that means we successfully updated the password. Now we can do like this. Flash success, saying that it's been correctly updated. And we want to log the user in for convenience. And then let's redirect to the profile page. And actually, I think logically it should probably be in this order. It doesn't really matter. But typically the flash happens right before the redirect. And if this fails, we should render back the edit form. Save that and see what happens here. So this is really tricky. It says undefined method update attributes for nil class. That's almost always an indication that there's an instance variable that hasn't been defined. So let's take a look at this. It's complaining that this at user is nil, which means that this did not find the user. Let's go back to the edit form here. Just refresh that. Probably didn't need to be refreshed, but now let's update the password. See what happens. Same problem. Let's look at the params to see what's happening. You can see here in the params, there's a user, there's a password confirmation, but there's no email. This thing here, this key value pair, params of email, doesn't appear when we submit this thing. And indeed, that's true. Let's take a look at the form again. The email isn't anywhere in here. Somehow, though, we need to pass the email of the user to the update action. Before we had access to the email because it was being submitted as part of the form, but here the form is just this. It's just password and confirmation. So what we really want is the email to be somewhere on this form but not be displayed. And there's a way to do that. Let's go to the edit form here. The way to do that is to put a hidden field here. Now we could use f.hiddenField here, but that would give rise to params of user of email instead of params of email. So it's more convenient to use hidden field tag in this context. So hidden field tag the symbol email, and then the email address is the user's email. Save that, and now let's take a look at the form. So if we look at this here, now there's a hidden field that has value equal to the email and name equal to the email here. So this is what's going to give us the parameter. Let's submit this thing. In fact, let's put in wrong passwords there. You think I could have left it blank, but we'll see in a moment why that's not right. Let's submit invalid passwords. You can see that our validations have been invoked and have been displayed. That's because of this. Remember, this is an @user object, right? So that our shared error messages partial is designed for users. We'll generalize that in the next lesson, but for now, this is great for rendering user errors. So all of the machinery that we built in the context of signing up users is now being reused. Meanwhile, though, let's take a look at our debug information. And here you see there's our email. That's from the hidden field that we added. So this is working now. So this is coming through here, where it's calling @user.updateAttributes. It's not valid, so this is false. And then it's rendering back the edit form like this. Now, I mentioned that we had a problem with these blank password and confirmation. Let's submit this with blanks. This shouldn't work, but it did. It didn't actually do anything, but it looks like it worked. And the reason for that is because, remember, when we updated the settings to allow users to update their information without filling out password and confirmation, we changed the user model here. We added this. We put in allow blank true, which is great when we're updating a profile. But the problem is that on this form, if both of these are blank, that should not be valid. So we need to catch that explicitly. There's no easy way that I know of to add this to the model, so what we're going to do is catch this here in the controller and render back a flash message. Let's put that here. Let's see if, let's look at the params. We've got params of user of password. So we want if params of user of password and params of user of password confirmation. We want if both of those are blank. By the way, the reason I put the paren here is I knew that I was going to have to break it across a line. It'll work either way, but I just like the visual appearance of this better. Anyway, so if both of those are blank, then say flash of danger. Oh, and we're going to be re-rendering the edit page, so this should be flash.now. So they can't be blank, and then render back the edit page, and then add this else if. See if that worked. Good, password confirmation can't be blank. You might wonder why we didn't just test one of these, right? If just params of user or password is blank, that's also invalid. But we only have to catch the case where they're both blank, because otherwise, if only one of them is blank, our validation will catch it. Like that. There's one more thing to add to this action. Remember we said we would expire the password reset after 2 hours. So let's do that. Let's say if user.password reset expired question mark. This doesn't exist. We'll have to put this on the user model. But if this is the case, then put in a flash message. See, it's expired. And then redirect. Let's redirect to the root URL. Well, actually, you know, it's more convenient to redirect to the new password reset URL. This gives the user a chance to issue another password reset. So that'll work. And then you change that to an else if. Oops, it's not else if, it's just else if, no E, no second E. And then in the user model, we need to add this method, this password reset expired method. So copy that here. Now this is a little tricky. If you want to see a formal proof of what I'm about to show you, that can be found in the final section in chapter 10 of the Ruby on Rails tutorial book. The way to do this is to compare the reset sent at timestamp to 2.hours.ago. At this point, you might be tempted to say, well, it's expired if the reset was sent at more than 2 hours ago. But in fact, this is the opposite of the correct answer. It should be less than. And the way to understand that linguistically is just to read this less than sign as earlier than. So if the reset was sent at earlier than 2 hours ago, then it means it's expired. So 3 hours ago is earlier than 2 hours ago. In that case, this thing will return true, and the password reset will have expired. Of course, this is annoying to test. We don't want to actually have to wait 2 hours to test it in the browser, and so this will be done as part of an integration test, and that's left as an exercise. This is looking like it's in pretty good shape now, but if you think about it, there's something wrong. Well, there's some formatting wrong here. Let's fix that. But there's something really disconcerting here, which is that we have not used the authenticated method at all. In fact, we haven't authenticated this in any way. Remember, we're supposed to be authenticating this reset token against the reset digest in the database. But right now, there's nothing like that at all. In fact, I can put any token in here, some random token /edit, question mark, email equals michael@michaelhartle.com, so %40. And this is now a password reset form for an email address that I might not have any control over, and with a token that has nothing to do with anything. So in fact, this thing is completely insecure. This allows anyone to get control of anyone else's account. So what we want to do is make sure that doesn't happen by authenticating this token against the reset digest. So let's go down here. We can actually put that right here in get user. This should apply both to the edit and update actions. Remember, that's where our filter is applying. So this @user, we should redirect to the root URL unless several things are all true. In fact, there's something else we haven't even done. You can check this out. Just put in some garbage here. So an invalid email address gives us an error. So what we should do here is catch that by saying unless @user and that user should be authenticated based on the token. So that's reset token. Remember, that's what we did here. We want to give it the attribute and then the token. So the token is in params of ID. And there's one more subtlety, which is that we do not want users to be able to log in, which happens right here, if they aren't activated. So we should say and not activated. So unless all of these three things are true, we should redirect to the root URL. Now if we go back, refresh this, you can see we got redirected. And here, if we give it a correct email address but a garbage token, it should also be redirected. Great. At this point, we've checked a bunch of things that can go wrong, but we haven't actually done a successful password reset, so let's do that. Here we go. So this should be valid. Nope, it did not work. I wonder why. Oh, this is a bug. It shouldn't be unless @user and not @user.activated. It should be the user is activated. So let's try that one more time. Okay, now we've got to the reset password form. All right, the password has been reset. In fact, let's log out and log in again with the new password. Oops, that was my password. Now you know it's Fubaz. It wasn't supposed to be secure. Log in here. I just saw two forms, or two fields, and I just was on autopilot from the previous form. There we go. All right, that's working. In this section, we'll write an integration test for the password reset functionality. let's get started by making sure that we're green. And while that's running, let's go over here and generate the integration test for password resets. Let's check here. Yep, we're green. Let's open up the password resets test. And let's split the screen. All right, let's talk about how we're going to approach this. The password resets integration test will broadly parallel the same code for the account activation, but there's a difference right away, which is that with account activation, the machinery for account activations was automatically invoked as part of signing up. So there wasn't a separate form, but here there is a separate form. It's this one. So first we're going to test this form. We're going to submit invalid and then valid information and make sure the behavior is correct. And then we'll simulate visiting the reset link from the email and again verify the right behavior for invalid and valid submissions. There's just one thing we won't be testing, and that's this here, the expiration. As noted in the text, that's left as an exercise. As with the account activation integration test, we'll be using Ruby classes to break up the test into smaller pieces. And in fact, I'm using the word test a little ambiguously. Here, there's an overall test, and then there are individual tests, which contain assertions. Let's take a look at the account activation test. Remember, it's in the user signup test. And we've got this setup here. Remember, we have to clear the email deliveries. So let's start with that. Remember, we want to use a class name that isn't test. That should end with something other than test. So start with this. And that should be all we need for now. And now let's make a class for the forgot password form. So let's take a look over here. This is submitting to new. So we're going to get the new password reset path. And then let's test basic things about the HTML. We'll assert that the template is password reset to new. And we'll also look for this here. We'll assert select an input field whose name is password reset of email. Right here. So that tests the form renders, and now let's test submission with an invalid email. So it's create here, so we're going to post. Let's just do a blank email, which is definitely invalid. So what it should do is render this here. Let's assert the response. All right, this unprocessable entity is necessary for Turbo. And then the flash should not be empty. And it should re-render the password resets form. Oh, and it looks like there's a syntax error here. Oh yeah, I need a colon. All right, now we're ready to test the actual password form. Let's take a look at that. All right, so that involved posting to the password resets path with valid information. So let's set up a class for that. So find a setup, and we'll call super to call this here to clears the action mailer based deliveries. And then we need a user. And then we need to post to that path. Actually, we can do this here, can't we? So that's the valid email address. Now this @user is the user in the database, but we also want to have a variable for the user that's trying to be reset. Now they should be the same, except the user that's being reset will have a reset digest. So let's make a second variable here. And here we'll use the same technique we used in the last lesson to pull out this instance variable. It could be a little confusing because they're both called @user, but that's why we're going to use a different variable name called reset user. And this is going to come from the assigns method. So this corresponds to this @user here. So this is a valid email. Let's test it. Now in theory, it's possible for @user, this @user here, to have a reset digest. We just want to make sure it's different from the one that's actually here, because it should be created when we post to create, right there. So we can assert that they're not equal. And let's also assert that one email gets delivered, that the flash isn't empty. Right here, it's this here, and that the redirect here is correct. And now let's test submitting to this form with the wrong email, with an inactive user, with the right email but the wrong reset token, and then the right email with the right token. So now we want the right email. So let's copy this. Same assertion. Oh, missed the space there. And now let's do the right email but the wrong token. Actually, we can just copy this. Very similar. And finally, the right email and the right token. That's here. It's actually just the same as this, except without the toggle on the activation. And what should happen here? Well, in this case, it should actually render the form. So that's this form. It's the password resets edit form. And let's look for that hidden value. This one right here, this hidden field tag. Here it is. So there should be this hidden input tag with name equal to email, type hidden, and value equal to the email address. Okay, and I think that should work. Let's take a look. That was a lot of stuff, though. It might very well fail. All right, good. Okay, so now we've tested rendering the form. The last thing we need to do is test all the different ways we could submit to it, initially with an invalid password and an invalid confirmation, then with an empty password, then with a valid password and a valid confirmation. So we're testing the update action here. We can put it in its own class, but in fact, oh, you know, I just realized I did this wrong. I forgot to put it in an extra class. This should be the password form test. Huh, was it even running it? Let's take a look. Let's take a look. Okay, so this should work. Oops, I'm missing an end. Okay, let's see if this works. Aha, good. So let me put a raise in here. I just want to make sure it's actually executing, since that whole time it looks like it wasn't. Yeah, good. Okay. All right, well, that's good that we have this extra section because it reminded me that I needed to inherit from password reset form. And we'll do it again here. Call this password update test. So here we actually don't need another setup method. This setup method is fine. But it's still nice to have a separate class just to put these in their own place. Okay, so let's start off with an invalid password and password confirmation. Now remember, this is an update action, so the corresponding request type is a patch. So we'll patch to the password reset path. Give it a valid token, and then the params will include a valid email but an invalid password and confirmation. Doesn't matter what you put in here. I like to line these up, but you don't have to do that either if you don't want. And so let's just test for the presence of a div with ID error explanation. It's here. Just make sure that we're rendering the error messages. Okay, let's do an empty password, which is a separate error, right here. And the reason for that is that you can leave the password empty ordinarily when you're updating it through the settings. But since we don't want to allow an empty password here, we have a separate branch. So let's test it. Actually, I'm just going to copy and paste. Quite a bit of overlap here, but not enough to justify any sort of extra methods. So we'll patch to reset path. This is a test update with empty password. And actually the confirmation will be empty too, but it doesn't matter because it's being caught right here. So we want this here. It's the same thing. Oops. And then let's just delete this. And it should be the same thing. There should be an error message. And finally, let's test a valid password and confirmation. Let's just use foo_baz here. So these agree. And so what happens is that we log in the user, we set the flash, and then we redirect to the profile page. So let's put those in. See if that works. All right, let's rerun the whole test suite and make sure we're green. And if we are, we're ready to move on. Cool. At this point, both account activation and password reset are working, so there's only one thing left, which is to get the email sending to work in production. We're going to be using a service called SendGrid that allows you to send up to 200 emails a day for free. That'll be plenty for our purposes. There's an add-on at Heroku for SendGrid, so we can add it like this. Heroku add-ons add SendGrid, and this is the starter tier. Now I should mention that this will not work unless your Heroku account has been verified, but that's really easy. All you have to do is add a credit card to your Heroku account. That doesn't actually charge you, it just associates a credit card with your account. So once you've done that, you should be able to add on the SendGrid starter package. Okay, to get that to work, we're going to have to configure our production environment. Let's take a look. It's in config environments production.rb. This is the kind of configuration I generally recommend copying and pasting, so I'm going to follow my own advice and copy it from the Rails tutorial book. Let's just copy this here. And we've got this raised delivery errors. Actually, you know, something just occurred to me. I think there's something repeated. Yeah, let's get rid of this. This does no harm, but we don't need that. And then in here, this can go anywhere here, so let's just look at mail. Is there a place to have mail? Yeah. And you can see this section here, it says your Heroku app. So that's, for me, Gentle Garden. Like this. gentlegarden.herokuapp.com. It's the host. Then that goes in here. We've done this configuration twice, once for development and once for test. It's like this right here. And then there are some settings for SMTP, which is the simple mail transfer protocol. And there are a couple of important lines here. There's a username and password, and this uses an env hash that lives on Heroku. This is a best practice for configuration files like this. You should never have a password exposed if you can at all avoid it. So what will happen here is, in this case, Heroku will automatically set these environment variables on the server. But we'll see in the next lesson how we can set them ourselves. In fact, we can find out what their values are. Let's do this. We can actually see what they are with Heroku config get. We'll actually do Heroku config set in the next lesson. It'll set our Amazon S3 credentials. So that's that, and then we can do password here too. So by putting them on Heroku and not putting them in our file, we arrange for it to be basically impossible for anyone to get any of these values unless they actually have access to our server. Can save that. With this configuration file, we're ready to make a commit and push up to Heroku. So let's do that. Let's rerun our test suite one more time before we deploy. All right, we're green, so let's deploy this thing. We've changed the data model, so let's run a migration. Let's Heroku run. All right, this should be working now. Let's check it out. Let's start with a new user. Create my account. That's good. So let me check my email, see if I have an activation link. Here it is, account activation. Will this work? And there it is, account activated. That's pretty awesome. Even I find it hard to believe this actually worked. Let's log out here. Oh, I forgot my password though. Password reset. Well, let's see if it works. Password has been reset. And now the base of our application is done, and it's really good. Part of what's so great about the current state of the sample app is that it's quite generic. This is good for basically any site that requires the ability to have users sign up, log in, log out, verifies their email addresses by requiring an account activation, and takes into account the possibility that they might forget their password. As a result, this is a great foundation for almost any kind of site you might want to build. In the final 2 lessons of the Rails tutorial screencasts, we'll take a look at a specific kind of application, one based loosely on Twitter, using Twitter-like microposts and a status feed of posts from followed users. In the process, we'll learn about some of the most powerful features of Rails, including image upload, custom database queries, and advanced data modeling with has-many and has-many-through.
In the course of developing the core sample application, we've now encountered 4 resources: users, sessions, account activations, and password resets. Only the first of these is backed by an active record model with a table in the database. The time has finally come to add a second such resource, user microposts, which are short messages associated with a particular user. We first saw microposts in larval form in lesson 2, and in this lesson we'll make a full-strength version by constructing the micropost data model, associating it with the user model using the has-many and belong-to methods, and then making the